Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I am on a podquest to learn everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Julianne. Julianne, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yes, hi. My name is Julianne. I am more or less in the product side of things on the game business. I've been predominantly working in live services in various product and product associated roles for like the last 11, 12 years.
Yeah.
And potentially looking at starting up my own company soon.
Which is scary and incredible and awesome. And let's try and kind of take a path through that. So, a lot of people who see this will know my background with live ops has been since about 98, so only a couple of years. And I wrote a book called Games as a Service. But the thing about live ops I found is that whether you're doing PC, mobile, or console, there are these commonalities, but there's also always such differences based on the organization and its capacity to deliver. But I'd be really interested to get your perspective. So you've been doing live ops type, product-based elements. You've done data and analyst-based elements. And what got you really kind of doing this product man? Because to me, this is the key thing: it's the product manager role, where for me it was always the buck stopped with me. I was responsible to make sure it made money. I needed to make sure it released on time. All of the threads, whilst I didn't make anything, I had to make sure it was made and it was made effectively. Does that mirror your experience in that role?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So I started my journey actually with an MBA,
Yeah.
and when I was doing that, that was right around the time when Facebook gaming and um, the idea of free to play
Mm.
became a big thing. This is
Yeah.
2011, 2013
Yeah.
timeframe. So that was what interested me originally getting into the games industry.
Yeah.
And when I joined as more or less like a brand manager.
Yeah.
Now, everyone's version of a brand manager is very different,
Just as a
but
designer is different, just as a product manager is different, product owner, that's one of my favorite phrases for the roles I did, but everyone has a different view of that as well. Sorry, go for it.
yeah, no worries. So in this role as brand manager, my um purview was quite extensive. So I was
Mm.
looking at strategy, I was looking at
Mm.
forecasting, I was looking at um, marketing, your traditional marketing
Mm.
plans, but I was also looking at how we would build out, roll out the products, or I guess the pre-order kind of stuff as well, because
Yeah.
I was working on an MMO. And you know, because I had that MBA, and brand management in traditional CPG firms or
Yeah.
consumer price is very much very similar.
Mm.
You deal with your 4Ps, your price, promotion, product,
Product
and I
place.
forgot
Yeah.
what the other one is, place.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
I'm a trained marketeer. I'm going to have the 4Ps like that. Although we can have an argument about whether it's people or sorry, yeah, people or place. That's one of the common arguments about that fourth P. Who cares?
to I forgot the fourth P, so clearly it's not important to
Yay!
me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, utilizing a lot of those elements into what I was looking at, right?
Yeah.
In terms of taking this Korean developed MMO and building it out for Western audiences. Now, this was a little bit different from what most people would be used to, because they would say I'm in it from the beginning, or coming in at some point. But because we had an existing product and we had to tweak it for the West, and for Western audiences, there was a
Yeah.
lot of trying to understand what the players would appreciate and what the game offered, and what we would need to change in order to satisfy those preferences. So if you want to think about product market fit in today's terms, that was kind of what we were doing.
Mm.
Um,
But I think this is actually something that I think a lot of people, particularly if you're an indie, you're not always thinking about product market fit. Whereas if you're coming at it from a commercially strategic perspective, you've got to start there, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And like if you look at traditional tech,
Yeah.
right, and the way that they look at things in terms of features and their own products and stuff like that, like a basic app is really quite small
Yeah.
in terms of complexity compared to, you know, these giant game systems.
Mm.
And yet every single little piece of that app, from, you know, your login button to you know, the emails that they send out, is all scrutinized
Yeah.
in terms of, does this work for our audience? And that same mentality I came in as well with a lot of our games. And it is a bit of a misnomer to sit there and say that the only thing we're interested is in monetization or making sure that you know, the events run on time. But it's also looking at, does this game resonate with our players? Does this feature work? Because I mean, that's the less sexy part
Yeah.
of game design. Is if you think about, like, and I worked on another title which was matchmaking, which
Yeah.
included matchmaking, right? um no one in the game design team knew how to build a matchmaking function. And so I sat down and pulled out the actual product documentation and
Mm.
said, this is, you know, the step-by-steps ways in which a good matchmaking feature needs to function from the point of view of the user,
Yeah.
right? And you had to incorporate like user stories
Yeah.
and all these things that
Well,
are very
good
traditional.
requirements design basically is what you're talking about here.
Yeah, well, it's less requirements and more about saying, you know, I am a player looking for another player, right?
Yeah.
Or I am expecting feedback, or I'm expecting this.
But for me, this is exactly what requirements design is all about. If you're not writing user stories, if you're not thinking about the flow, if you're not thinking about every component of what, because every interaction a player has is a reason to churn.
Yeah. Yep. And the reason I don't call it requirements and the reason I kind of focus on the user story is
Yeah.
because it allows some uh, interpretation,
Yeah.
right? If I sit there and say, I require, you
Fair.
know, the user to do this,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to saying, I'm the user, I want this outcome,
Yeah.
right? How do I get from point A to point B?
Yeah.
Well, I leave that to, you know, the people smarter than me. Um, but the fact of the matter is that I've identified that's a necessity or a need in, you know, the functionality of not just the game, but the services and the pieces all around it.
And again, I just for the purposes of kind of like framing that, I think that's an incredibly important factor because any designer should be telling the team what the process feels like or what the process they would like to have happen, but not try to solve it for them. I mean, we kind of want to solve the obvious. You know, we need to know enough about the process so we don't go down bad tangents. But if we tell somebody how to code it, why we've just wasted everybody's time.
There is a very excellent class that I took in my MBA, which was user-centric design.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And uh, one of the projects I had was to effectively redesign my Kindle.
yeah,
And I had to literally sit down with someone, right, if by redesign, and watch them as they go through it and do a series of tasks.
yeah.
And there is a natural inclination to want to solve the problem
Mm,
straight away,
mm,
right? Because most of us are problem solvers.
yep.
But I had to step back and say, okay, what is the actual problem that they're experiencing? And then, you know, when I understand that problem, you know, you move forward into that solution. So I've
Yeah.
taken, you know, that kind of attitude all the way through, even down into like community management,
Mm,
right? Because a lot of players will have problems
mm,
and that they sit there and cry about, and they'll give you solutions, right? You can always see this in the Q and A's when you open them up, and they all have those that, have you considered doing X, Y, Z,
yeah,
or have you thought about? And like, that's not a question, that's a suggestion.
yeah,
And so you had to really kind of dig deep and say, what is the problem that they're actually identifying? Because
yeah.
they're moving towards a solution based.
And it's so common. And it's one of the things I kind of like. I think players are fantastic at telling you, helping you find the problem, but they're very rarely designers. And
Yeah.
they very rarely have that. No, I mean, very few people, even when I'm a consumer of something else, stepping back and thinking what that team has to do and the other pressures on that team and the resource constraints. I won't know those things. So how can I design the solution for them?
Yeah. But it's I just realized that I've wandered off completely the
No,
path
no,
of
no.
the original question.
No, you haven't. It's because what we're saying is I find this really fascinating because we're talking about the role of what a product manager, product owner, brand manager is. And I think we're
Yeah.
establishing this flow that you've taken from starting out with an MBA mindset. Whereas I started out with a marketing mindset, but I was always a game designer, in terms of hobby games, tabletop games, stuff like that. So I've always had that game design thing going on in my head. But you're coming at it from a kind of, from what my observation is, you're coming from a more clinical, for want of a better phrase, MBA framed way of thinking. That's kind of organized, structural way of thinking, where you're looking at user centric design, user centric requirement setting. For what you prefer not to use that phrase, that makes sense. Because I'm so habit formed to say that. My job description has had requirements as part of the process. But what I think that focused on is that started with thinking about the player first.
Yeah. And this is something like my last couple of jobs, it was very explicit in my job
Yeah.
description where they would say that you are the voice of the player,
The
you are the voice
champion
of
of
the
the player.
consumer,
Yeah,
right? And it's not because, I'm not the community manager in
yeah. Mm.
this regard, saying this is what the community wants, but I'm looking at it in terms of what does the player experience need to be. And while people with an MBA are generally misnomered within the community is like, oh, these guys are
Yeah.
only interested in the money and they're only interested in blah blah blah. No, it's a philosophy around what the players, because we aren't game designers,
No.
right? We're not going to design a game, and not necessarily we're creative either in that regard,
Yeah.
because we're not like trying to prove our creative experiences. We're trying to say, how do we satisfy the people who are using the
Yeah.
product? Um, and I've been very fortunate, I would say, in that the last couple of games that I've been working on are shooter titles.
Yeah.
I don't play shooters. So I have absolutely
Mm.
no bias whatsoever coming into those sorts of games and being able to say, the players expect X, Y, Z. Here is the data that supports it, as opposed to my own personal bias coming in and saying, well, I play, shooter games, and therefore I think that this is what needs to happen.
I think you said something really important there, and I know there's been a few threads in the live ops community talking about I have to play in order to be able to make a game, and I think there is something in that. But when you're dealing with larger teams, I think having some almost like the conscience, for want of a better phrase, that's not completely obsessed and absorbed with the genre can provide us with a way of, and like an escape valve, a kind of sanity check stage. And I know myself, when I'm emotionally engaged in the design of something, I need my business partner Ella to pull me out from that way of thinking. And I will tell you you're wrong because I know how that should play, and I'm wrong by saying that. What I should be doing is being my professional business minding self. What does the data tell me? What does the audience actually do? What does the market look like? What does good look like in the market?
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing that?
Um, it's hard because uh I've been in both situations where I've worked on a title
Mm.
that I've absolutely loved,
Mm.
and it hits every single gamer box I could think of. And I've worked on titles
Yeah,
that I just couldn't care less,
yeah,
uh,
and that's
if
okay.
I got it, and that's okay,
Yeah,
right? And
as
but
long
the
as
thing is
other
like,
people in the team care about it and you relate to them, I think it's okay.
yeah, and like we're all gamers at the end of the day. Like
Yeah,
we all speak the same languages, we
yeah,
all nerd out about the same things. I throw the Star Trek memes out as much as possible. But the the whether or not a gun has the right heft or weight is not something that I'm going to be able to judge on that,
yeah,
right? And that shouldn't be on me to judge. that should be on the player, right? The player makes that assessment whether they feel like they're powerful, whether that particular power fantasy comes about.
Yeah.
However, right, there are some universal experiences within every game that you need to consider, like your onboarding.
Yeah.
I will sit down and I will play the game, like first play the game and go all the way through, regardless of my experiences, and see if I'm onboarded appropriately. And the benefit is for the game titles that I don't normally play, I don't have that prior experience of I know which buttons to shoot or whatever. I don't know what to expect, and so I'm a complete noob. But the other thing is like for the titles that I do have a lot of experience with, I still have to put on that fresh hat and say, okay, I'm coming in, I don't know what I'm necessarily doing, but I'm going to find people who have absolutely no experience and no interest and run, again, going back to that user-centric design class, you got to watch them go through that. And it's just a little bit of extra effort, because not everyone will necessarily have those resources, but just call your mom and say, hey, just do the first 15 minutes of this game and see if they get it.
I'm a huge fan of things like Antidote and Playtest Cloud, to let me be able to get access to a more mainstream audience relatively cost effectively. I think that sort of stuff, and then getting the recording of what they did, getting the survey of what they felt they did, and that to me is magic, because as much as I can play a game, and I have a role where if I'm being asked as a consultant to check your game out, I'm going to spend my own money. I'm not expensing it. Because if I'm going to spend my money on your game, it's because I really want to. And I think that if I'm just going to expense it, all I'm doing is I'm doing your QA.
Fair, yep.
And so that, I think, is one of those it's those sort of I mean, we all have our different ways and tricks about doing it, but I think the important thing for me about what you're saying is understanding the audience from the audience's perspective. And sometimes when we are obsessed gamers on that particular genre, we can lose sight of the scaled audience, which do not necessarily have that level of obsession.
There's and one of the titles that I've worked on, it hasn't been released. I jumped in on my first week and played it. And when I say played, that's a very generous term. I ran around in the world that had been created, and was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I can do these abilities and shoot some things and climb some ladders or whatever. But I'm like, where's the game? And I had to have the actual game director stand behind me and say, look at this beautiful PowerPoint deck that talks about all the things that we are, this game is about and that we're going to be doing and stuff like that. And I'm like, but
where's the game?
You're not going to be sitting behind every single player to make that kind of community. So that game experience needs to be like right at the very front. People have to understand, that what your promise is in terms of what this game is going to be providing for you. Because I don't know if this is a puzzle game. I don't know if this is a shoot 'em up, or a just a virtual world in which are running around in. So this kind of needs to be kind of clear without even any of the marketing stuff to be there to help support it.
And I feel like the game slayer, because the number of times that I'm using that phrase, where's the game, it's ridiculous. And the trouble is, it's so easy to say those things. When you're trying to help a team take a direction, you can't just say, oh, it's hard to, sometimes you have to say, you haven't got a game here. Other times you've got to find a way to kind of identify, well, where they're aiming for, what's the vector to give the player that information. And I imagine that's quite a lot of what you're trying to do at that stage. Is that right?
Yeah. And this is kind of the benefit of having a product owner, product manager, product person kind of inbuilt with your game early rather than later. Because I've joined a game right around its beta, and I couldn't really afford to do many changes. I can only look at its live service once it was going out. And then
Sorry.
which
I'm laughing, but it's breaking my heart.
I know, like it's you laugh, you cry,
Yeah.
because otherwise, yeah.
Yeah.
And then is that in this title it was still a kind of in pre-production, and so there was an opportunity to make uh, those sorts of dramatic changes because again, you've got the I wouldn't say dispassionate, but you've got the person who is looking at it from a more logical standpoint of if a player comes in and plays this, what is their experience going to be like?
Yeah.
Versus, a more creative kind of endeavor, or in some cases a technical kind of endeavor, where they're like, hey, look at all these cool things that I've created. And I'm like, well, I can't sell it,
No.
right? No person is going to want to utilize, the things that you are saying is really cool. Like technically it's cool, but as a player, as a person, don't really care.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think you made an interesting point there about when the product mindset is brought in, a productization. I think, although I talk about services and we talk about live ops, which is a service mindset, we do often use the word product. And I still think, even in the context of services, it's useful to remind ourselves that what we're doing is we're creating a kind of packaging, a kind of frame around what the game experience is. So there's continuity, like you say, branding. There's the kind of understanding of the player experience. And do you think that? Um, well, I'm trying to work out the best way of phrasing this. It's like, what's the core problem that you usually? What's the core obstacle you get going from when you first arrive on the scene? What's the most common core problem you're having to resolve?
Oh goodness. Um.
Because to me, there's two things I'm almost always facing.
All right. Give me your.
The first time user experience is usually the
Yes.
first one, and the
Oh
second
God.
one
Yes.
is the monetization model. But then I'm the monetization guy. Of course, I'm going to be facing that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Your Fatui, or your first time user experience,
Yeah,
is always terrible.
yeah,
Like, I've
always.
never been in a game where I've jumped in, and with the one exception of that MMO that
Yeah,
would already been developed and released. So in Korea, everyone else has been uh, quite awful, and it was, and it's fine because it's not the sexy part of the game,
hmm.
right? It's like
But
having
it's
to
so
do some handhold.
important.
It is so
Yeah,
important, right? The second thing, I guess, is moving from the mentality of we have to we've like if you look at traditional game development, right? You've got so much time and chunks within your production. Like you've got
yeah,
your milestones, you've got your different test times. If things slip a little bit, then whatever, you shift dates around and you accommodate, right? Whereas when you're in live service, um, it has to be the date is the immovable object, right?
yes,
If you've committed to a
yeah,
date, that is what you have to deliver on. And for a team to shift from the full on game development production mindset of, okay, we've got all the time in the world up until, a tentative release date in 1 year, whatever, to we've got 6 weeks schedule of releasing or whatever that may be, that's the hardest thing to get people into that mindset and into that kind of
yeah,
planning. And I've got a number of tools that I use to introduce people into kind of, because like conceptually they know, they're like, yes, okay, we're going to have to do this,
yeah,
but to really kind of emphasize it, you have to shift into that kind of cadence very, very early on. I like one team was doing it even once they got into out of pre-production into actual full production, is they would go into 6 week sprints,
yeah,
and they would have separate kind of teams that would going to be focusing on based upon what their live service release was going to look like.
yeah,
Because you know your live service release could not just necessarily be, okay, well, in 6 weeks we just release a gun, or in 6 weeks we release a new set of cosmetics. There could be, new maps, new features, new whatever,
But there's going
and
to
you
be
have to build your teams
challenges,
around it.
missions, there's going to be storefront changes, there's going to be cosmetics, like you say. Some people, I think, make the mistake of thinking that every update is another DLC, which is so much work. You don't need to do that much work, and you'll kill your team if you try to. I have a fundamental problem, though, and you kind of hinted at it with this mindset change. The mindset change. So I feel like a lot of teams try to use the same tools and approach and mindset of releasing the game in the first place to running their live service, and I think it's entirely broken. The reason is that thing about the dates don't change, and for
Mm-hmm.
me, I think you've got to work backwards. I think you've got to work out not what am I going to do and then release it. It's more what can I fit, and I think that's a hard thing to give up, because I think the biggest lesson I learned back in, actually, PlayStation Home, I worked this out. I always wanted to have a back button. So there was no virtual world equivalent of the home button in PlayStation
Mm.
Home. And I still to this day think it was one of the fundamental reasons why we didn't quite resonate at the time, because it was easy to not really think where you were. Now, I might be over egging it. The point is, I never got anyone else to buy into that argument. But the thing that liberated me from the anxiety about that design choice was that it was only ever shifted to the next release. I didn't have to kill my darling. I just had to say next release.
Mm.
And I think that mindset of realizing that you don't have to give up on your dreams, you just have to work out what can you fit. And if something's taking too long, what's the implication of pulling it?
Yeah, in some ways I agree, in some ways I disagree.
Yeah.
In like the best example I could probably provide is a title that was in early access,
Yeah.
right? It's not your traditional live service. We got events
Mm.
and stuff happening, but you did have a requirement effectively of constantly updating the game
Yeah.
with new features, content, whatever,
Mm.
because that's what early access is about. And I had planned effectively 12 months, a 12-month roadmap
Mm-hmm.
of what we would be working on, what we would be releasing. And those items were based upon a number of factors. Uh, marketing felt that they needed something to make it more exciting in
Yeah.
order to be successful in their
Absolutely.
things. So they needed like new cat champions or characters. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, whatever. Um, production obviously was like, try to fit as little as possible so that we have time for polish
Yeah.
and certification cycles or whatever. And then the designers are like, here's this really cool little neat concept that I've been working on, but I don't know, but I'm like, I look at it and go, how is this, like, it's only going to impact such a tiny sliver of the player base.
But it's
And you just
cool. I
have,
want it.
it is cool, but like
Yeah.
that, my role was to kind of sit there and prioritize
Precisely.
each of these pieces in terms of maximum impact, how costly it will be to develop,
Yeah.
and whether it will achieve our goals in terms of our 3, 4, 5 letter acronyms. But I made sure to keep a 12-month set schedule. I rolled out into an 18-month rolling schedule.
Fantastic.
So every month or so, I would sit down with the team and we would assess where we were and what we were doing and if we needed to shift.
Yeah.
And part of that with the releases as we came up, I prioritized. I used this particular priority system where we would have a priority one, which was must ship,
Yeah.
right? This has to go into this content drop.
Yeah.
Or else, if it doesn't work, then we do not release,
Yeah.
and everyone's pulling in all-nighters, right? This is our number one priority. Get it done.
Like Halloween environment takeover. There is no point in releasing that late.
Correct. Priority 2 was, work on this next, but if it doesn't make it into this release, okay, but it will become a priority 1 in the next release, right?
Yeah.
So it is a high important item, but not like super time sensitive, right? And then priority 3 was just, this would be really nice to have in our release, but if it doesn't make it in this release, well, we'll keep tracking on it, in the background. And we've actually managed to really gain that kind of clarity, because as along with that 12-month map, each one had their own levels of priority. So the producers could see well in advance what was needed and when.
Yeah.
Right. And so they were able to organize their teams in a way that made sure that those things would be delivered. And if problems came up, like if the one person who was responsible for VFX went on 6 months maternity leave or something like that, then at least they knew what was coming up down the pipeline. They could organize adjustments or communicate with me or with the other decision makers, whether we needed to make some shifts within the schedule and how that would affect.
Yeah.
So it was both very flexible in terms of our planning, but also very strict in terms of making sure that we had something to deliver each time we had a planned drop. And the idea was that we build that kind of discipline within the teams, so that by the time the game came out of early access and we were looking at things like battle passes and other sorts of monetization things, that is already kind of ingrained within the team, and that our player base knew that we were able to commit to the dates and things that we had, because we also published our 12-month roadmap. Right? We said, this is what we're planning on doing.
What a mistake to make. No, I thoroughly love the ambition that says. It's the level of detail that you can offer without causing yourself as much pain as if you don't release it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we weren't super explicit. Like, we'll sit there and say new character, right? We won't tell them what kind of character it was or anything along those lines. But the intention was, at least they knew what to expect, that we were continually updating the game and making it better according to their feedback, which was, the purpose of early access.
Yeah, totally. We didn't manage it on PlayStation and quite. The US team did it, which was not just publish it, but at a high level, allow the players to vote on requirements. Now, you have to be careful how you word it and structure it, but it's a really nice technique when you can get away with it.
There is a game that I've actually bought in early access and followed through, called V Rising.
V Rising, yeah.
They did an amazing job of having a board open where anyone in the player community could make suggestions about what they wanted, and they used a similar kind of voting system where other people could vote it up or down according to how they felt, and then they took those suggestions and integrate that in with the next update. And I believe they're still doing it now. Like, they're in 1.0 now, but I believe they're still doing something similar, because the latest release that they did had a bunch of changes that I remember voting for and saying this would be, absolutely amazing quality of life.
But like any community management, the important thing is that if you aren't going to do something that's highly voted for, you still have to tell them why.
Yeah. But tools like that for a product manager, super, super important, because now I know what the people are looking for. Now I know the pain points. Now I know,
and we have to take it with
things
a pinch
that
of
would be
salt
valuable
to an extent, because it is the vocal minority who are making that voting, but it's still a genuine, measurable indicator.
Correct.
Okay, so,
and as I said, most of them aren't complaints. They're just like suggestions of, I'd really like to be able to do X, Y, Z. That seems reasonable.
And even if they're complaints, the fact that they're bothering complaining means that they care anyway.
Yes.
And I think that's something that's easy to forget. So I'm going to ask you the next question, which is, you've got this roadmap, but you've also highlighted there are lots of different teams involved in this process. And they're not just in the production and material making of these things. They're in the functional delivery. They're in the certification processes. They're in the deployment testing, legal sign-off. There's a lot of people in the machinery of making a live activity happen at a level of quality control. How do you track that?
Oh gosh. I've seen it done multiple ways. In the case of the MMO with from Korea, we were lucky in that they delivered builds, and then we would do our own QA and kind of discussion and stuff like that upon that. And so we would have our own internal communication networks in which we understand what was happening. And if problems arose, then the Koreans would be up and helping us out and stuff like that. But we would also, again, plan out 12, 18 months in advance of what our roadmap's going to look like. The other option is, the other alternative was it was self-published. And so I was embedded with the development team, but I also had to herd the cats on the other side.
Yeah.
And so that came through, I found the most effective was, we did, I wouldn't say it a weekly stand-up, but we would have these kind of little check-in meetings. And we would say, what's the progress of, the game development side of things? Okay, red light, green light, very, very simple. It's good as
we
not.
called them RAG meetings, so red, amber, green, classic. The thing that I've always found, though, is it ended up being a spreadsheet of doom. And I use that phrase because so many of my peers also use the phrase of the spreadsheet of doom. And that to me is this is something, just by the by, I'm trying to fix and build a tech platform to solve, but so I'm biased on this stuff. But I think there's something about this. How do you avoid the fact that the marketing guy was on holiday the week that we decided to drop the feature that he then included in the trailer because he already had captured footage of it, but we've withdrawn it from the release, and now we're going to spend 20 grand having to redo all the trailers?
Well, the first obvious answer is, if it was a P2 feature, then he shouldn't have put it in the trailer.
Very
right?
true. Very true. But then,
and again,
but how do you promote it? How do you get people excited about it if you don't include it?
Well, that's where the P1.
Yeah.
That's like the P1 should have been the thing that would have been what the market had used to promote.
Yeah.
Right. As I said, it's when I say you're juggling the different priorities with the different perspectives of each team, you've got to take that into consideration. And keeping track of, and as I said, I cannot speak better about this 12-month rolling process, because communication is the key to everything. When you're dealing with so many different groups, so many different services, and we were all remote because it was during COVID times. So it wasn't as if I could get up and talk to someone on the side there,
or whatever, desk or whatever.
Yeah. So while I didn't have the spreadsheet of doom, I had the PowerPoint slide of doom. But
is that better?
fewer line items. Let's just say that. So we made sure that we prioritize the stuff, but of course, everything's still in Jira, and bugging people to update their Jiras is always a pain in the ass.
And there's a difference between the task level and the strategic level, I think.
Exactly. And a lot of this PowerPoint that I used was also meant to communicate to everyone and saying, here is if you can't make it, like, here is the status, right? Here are the things that are blocking your potential down the road. Here is the things that we need to consider potentially down the line.
For me, it's a bit like an air traffic control system. So I've got a piece of code that someone's doing because there's a game mode element. I've got some art assets which are going to be on the retail side. So I need to know that they've gone through the processes. So, the thing is configured appropriately and it can be deployed on the server. I need to know that the asset is going to be, documented appropriately, so it's in the storefront. And then I've got the marketing material and messaging that said those things are going to happen. Some of that's going to be in-game, some of that's going to be social. That might even be a trailer. It might even be paid UA. But for me, there's an air traffic control component to that, which is, where is it? How far has it gone? Has it been signed off? Is it fit for purpose? How do I know the right people have seen it and said it's good to go?
Yeah, and that's a problem that we've struggled with all the way through. In my brand manager days, it was Jira sign-offs. Like, we would make requests for storefront banners and in-game advertising and stuff like that, and we would have to. Thankfully, it was web-based, so we weren't reliant upon builds or anything, but we had to approve every single piece of item that came through. but we were a tight running ship
It
in
sounds like
that,
it.
whereas in other areas where it was less of a smoother process, to say the
But we've
least.
seen all of those. Those. I mean, let's face it. I mean, one of my most fun things. The keywords guys used to. Well, they do a thing called Community Clubhouse. They got me to host the first couple of them, and I got to chat to mates of mine who happen to have been doing this for years, and we just basically bitched about the wonderful disasters we'd all experienced. And
Oh, look,
yeah,
pre MBA, I was
yeah,
working finance in oil and
yeah,
gas, and like this is a Fortune 50 company,
yeah.
and our forecasts were all in Excel, right? I was crashing Excel on a regular
How
basis.
many
Like
gigs was your
we
Excel spreadsheet?
I do not know, but I like if you get me on a V lookup, then I am like all about it, mate.
So, I mean, I'm gonna before we kind of like wrap up. I mean, let's just talk a little bit about postmortems. Now, I'm a big believer in a postmortem. I'm actually a believer in the pre-mortems, but I always find things get in the way. We end up not doing it because we've got time that week or someone's away. How have you? I mean, do you believe in the postmortem? I mean, so for those who don't know, it's about where we look at the data, we look at what performance, we look at the delivery, we look at all the elements that happened. Hopefully, we go over the risk and issue logs, and we try to work out how to improve the process moving forward. Anyway, enough of an explanation. Do you get time to do that?
There's always the ambition to do so.
Mm,
Um, the reality is that we don't have the time,
yeah.
right? And so as much as I would love to be able to solicit, spend an hour or 2 hours or whatever with the team to go over those sorts of things, they're too busy working on the next delivery.
Mm,
They're too busy doing, their own kind of work because they would understand a little bit fundamentally what it is. So it's my job to collect the data, is to interpret the numbers, is to pull the community feedback and everything into some sort of kind of discussion, and then say, hey, here's the TLDR, these are the things that we need to focus on, these are the things,
mm,
and whatever. And so part of that was necessary in establishing trust with the team as well, so
mm,
that they know that I'm talking to them in the voice of the player, right?
yeah.
As opposed to, again, taking my own personal bias out of it, right? If they wanted to, they could go and have a look at the raw data if they so desired. And one person was really keen on it. He was very much into the weeds and in that kind of stuff.
Mm,
And I try to encourage that as much as possible because the more you understand, the better it would be. But um, you know, most of the post-mortem reports tend to be for executives
yeah.
going upwards so that they can understand what was good and what was bad, as opposed to kind of an analysis by the team on how things went and how
Mm.
we can improve things.
But for me, it feels like such a missed opportunity because I mean, I understand that why we end up not doing it, and this is absolutely common. It's normal that people don't do it, but it feels to me like for the want of that step back, it's hard to optimize our delivery processes. It's hard to work out which user facing experience was worthwhile and effective. It's hard to work out, did we allocate the resources of the team to the best of the delivery?
Yeah.
Have we overworked them when we didn't need to? Because if we'd have taken a slightly different approach, we would have dealt with it better. And we won't know what that slightly different approach was without getting the people who did it to tell us. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Mm,
Like there is the one side, which is your product and the value of the product towards the players, and then there's the team component.
mm,
Like how did the team respond to
mm,
the situation? And like for the most part, I've not been as involved with the team dynamics because
yeah.
of my outward facing role, but it is important
Mm,
because you want to make sure that you are transparent with your team, that you are I was referring earlier to building that trust, right? That they trust in you and trust in, you know, the decisions that you are making is for the betterment of the game and not because of some, you know, personal desire to replicate, you know, Fortnite or have my own killer bunnies in the game, right? So it's still very, very important, but I've also found that um, I'm a big fan of continuous feedback cycles as
Yeah.
opposed to one-offs. And so if people are struggling within um, a particular scenario or something, you know, much like how agile requires those sorts of daily stand-ups and you communicate those blockages and stuff like that within your work component, you know, would really like, and it depends. For me, it was all about my producer as well, making sure that they have the same kind of philosophy. But those continual feedback cycles was also necessary to make sure that everyone is confident and comfortable with their roles and with their task and what is expected of them. And my I tended to over communicate, I would think,
That sounds
because like
ideal.
well, it's just like, you know, everyone it shouldn't be just be that, you know, here's the good things that are happening
No.
and rah rah, here's the guts of what's happening and here are the problems that we're facing, and it's not just, you know, necessarily things that are yeah, COVID was such a fun time, you know, of all the things that was going on, but it was, you know, it's a leadership kind of um,
Yeah, it's interesting because I have to
attribute.
say I've fallen out of love with agile to an extent in live ops, and but it's not that I don't think it has its place. I just think that there's a again because I think that our planning needs to be based on that the date is immovable and the contents are what change. And there isn't a lot argument with agile that that should be what it can do, but when I've seen it implemented, it rarely is because you've got to get your release to a level of momentum that meets a minimum threshold of player experience. I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could do a whole podcast about what my thoughts are
Maybe we
regarding
should.
agile.
Yeah.
But I'll be quick about
Yeah.
this, right? So agile for some circumstances
Yeah.
I think is very beneficial, right? The whole
100%.
idea of pivoting very quickly and responding to your players, to your market, to trends or whatever is extraordinarily
Yeah.
valuable in I can see that happening in mobile.
Yeah.
I can see that happening in some PC games, not
Yeah.
all. Um, and for the player behavior that reflects those types of games makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
right? But we are now in a environment where players are kind of almost like a chicken and the egg situation where are players having to play daily because that is what they want to do or is that what they're forced to do?
Exactly. Which is not
And
good planning, is it? It's not good experience.
yeah, and so and that's another completely I have a huge soapbox on that piece.
Yeah.
But
I
the point
suspect
is
it's
is
similar to
that
mine.
um well the thing is with agile, if you're going forward with the you know, we must throw out something quickly and you know, we got to have these stand-ups and make sure that everything's out and fine. It works for some situations,
Yeah.
it doesn't work for others. And I think given how game design and development is such a complex beast, we need to be more considerate of the fact that some things just need time to
Mm.
cook. And we as people, as humans, are a lot more conditioned to more like weekly updates than we are to like daily type of setups. And you know, going back to that player behavior thing, if we're releasing things on a daily basis or even on a hourly basis, like I've seen some video games, mobile games are like this, then it are we is that necessary? right?
Yeah, I'm with you. So to a bit of quick history. Back in the day when mobile Java was a thing and an operator thing happened, I moved from doing weekly updates on the storefront to doing updates every day to doing updates every 4 hours, and I saw a dramatic impact in terms of increased user base. However, that was a storefront on Java games. That wasn't a requirement to come back or you're going to miss out. That was just making sure that the space felt like an ever evolving, emerging, delightful place to come back to.
And when was this?
And this is like 2003 to 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that that would have a similar effect today?
I do, but only if you're coming at it as you're coming in the world and you're meeting somebody, you're meeting your neighbors and finding out what's going on. The difference is I don't want to create a trap for players to feel stuck in. I want to create a world which feels alive. And there's a massive difference between those two things, I think.
Yeah. So the I believe it was Reed Hastings made this comment a couple of years, a bit more than years ago, which has resonated with me. He said the biggest competitor to Netflix is Fortnite.
Yep.
And we are now in the attention economy.
We are.
Right?
And that's the risk
Time.
here.
Yeah. So money is infinite. Back in those, in our heady days of free to play and everything, right? Money was the grand thing we try to focus on.
Yeah.
Now it's time.
Yeah.
Now it's engagement. And the problem is time is a finite thing. You'll only ever have 24 hours of the day.
Absolutely.
And if you have your TikTok or your Facebook or sleeping or school, work, real life, whatever, taking up portions of that time, any sort of game or experience, I guess,
Yeah.
that is going to take up some of that time needs to be respectful of that time.
Exactly. And that to me is the core of what I was trying to explain by the making the game feel alive rather than a trap. And I think that respect is absolutely critical, and it's a massive difference. It's different. Basically, it's come back to we're building an experience for players to play, not one that is locking them into an attention-grabbing routine. I think it's another.
You look at Fortnite Reddit threads,
Yeah.
and people will complain about how grindy the game is now.
Yeah, crazy,
right?
Crazy.
The amount of time that they have to spend to grind through the battle pass, and again, Korean MMO, which is synonymous with grind. We understand that completely. That the idea of chores, the ideas of being forced to come in and do something over and over and over again in order to obtain the fun thing that you want is no longer going to be acceptable nowadays, because people can just say, nah, screw this. I'm going to go, I could spend my 2 hours running the same map over and over again for a little bit of resource, or I can spend my 2 hours on this cool little indie game that is going to give me
intrinsically rewarding.
Exactly.
I mean, this again, it strikes me as a mass. I mean, we should probably have a long conversation about this stuff anyway, because I think we'd have fun with it. I mean, for me, this whole principle though is understanding what is that balance between compelling and enjoyable. And if the balance gets broken, we break the game. In the same way that the whole pay to play, pay to win balance factor becomes a problem. Again, all of these systems are systems in flow, in balance, and we break that balance at our risk. But I think from an operational point of view, what I find interesting is what we've got to go from is this purely creative, spontaneous creation process. At some point, as a business making games, we need to get to the stage where we are able to still deliver that excitement and delight, but to reduce the overhead of doing it so we can reproduce things efficiently, creating pipelines that are reproducible, that are low burden, but still manage to make players feel delighted when they come out.
Yeah, and I honestly, like, I look at some of the masterclass titles in this space. League of Legends is probably one of the best because they've been around for 10, 15
Yeah,
years
yeah, yeah.
now, right? Um, they make frequent changes,
Yeah.
right? Every 2 weeks, 4 weeks, I think it is. They make frequent changes,
Something like
but
that.
it's small tweaks, right? It's small tweaks to numbers that completely change, the gameplay experience for a lot of those people who are
Mm.
experiencing it. And that sort of stuff is something that you can kind of look into in terms of, all right, we don't have to necessarily make new content, but can we tweak the existing content we have in a way that provides a different set of challenges?
Yeah.
Um, and while the philosophy and the general rule of thumb is like, oh God, no, give us something new. Players want new. Again, again, this V Rising game that I've been playing,
Yeah.
had a big content patch that changed a bunch of things. Like they changed how something as simple as blood would work. You're supposed to ingest blood, and that will give you bonuses to your abilities, and depending on the blood you
Yeah.
have will change those bonuses. But they've changed the bonuses on a couple of the bloods, and now I get to sit there and play around with different builds and different ways of playing the game in a way that is new and exciting, that is a different experience than what I had been playing before. And I don't think that uh, we need to have completely new content in order to create a new experience.
Absolutely. And that's why I love putting stuff onto the server to do config based changes rather than having to build new code every single time. Because to me, that just seems like a waste of the systems we had in place in the first place. We kind of the thing I hate is when you open up a mobile game and there's like 15 mini games, most of which no longer really work because they were all intended to be seasonal once upon a time.
Yep.
And I'm confused. Anyway, on that note, thank you so much for that. It's been fantastic. I mean, what's that one thing? If someone's thinking about kind of particularly live ops and product management issues, is there one piece of advice you give people?
Oh gosh. Um, don't neglect your first time user experience.
It's fair. And I mean, not. I think it's really important to go back to it regularly. You know,
Yeah, things will always change,
yeah,
right? And these are not necessarily things that are and this is what I love about live service games. It can be, again, your early access titles. It can be your, I release a DLC type patch every once in a while. It
yeah,
can be, new things happen every single day, right? But your player base will always change,
yeah,
and things that will always change, and you've got to respond to your players and to your players' behavior, because um, sometimes forcing them to do something that they don't necessarily want to do may
yeah,
backfire based upon what they're used to. But what could work, what has worked in the past may not work now. What hasn't worked in the past may work now,
yeah.
right? It's such an evolution, and
Timing is
there's
everything.
always, yeah, and like, don't be afraid to experiment. Like that's the other thing that I think is also important, because if you're in this journey with your players and you are upfront with your players about, hey, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing things to make the game worthwhile for you, right? If you throw something out that doesn't resonate, so what? You're like, okay, well, we'll just pull that out. Obviously that didn't work. We'll try something else, and see how that goes. Again, Riot does a fantastic job, or did a fantastic job of doing that. I remember
Mm,
being in the United States when they rolled out the ranked uh positions. I think that was
yeah,
initiative that only lasted like 3 months, was very, very negatively received, but they tried it.
yeah,
And then they said, okay, it doesn't work, so be it. And they didn't lose any players from it. They didn't lose any respect from it. And like, I gained a lot of respect for them because they're willing to try something that was for the benefit of the players, but the players didn't really respond as well to it. And they're like, okay, we'll go back and have a look at what their other options are.
And I think
So
in the end, that's kind of what it comes down to, isn't it? It's like we are creating experiences for players. The moment we lose sight of that's their entertainment, we lose sight of our product. And the whole purpose of being a product owner, product manager, is to be able to champion the needs of those players. And sometimes they don't even know what those things are, and it's our job to find out. And I think that's one of the joys of in my career has been when I've been able to do that job. It is one of the most demanding, one of the most well, the one summary I would give to that role is that I always described it when anyone else asked, is it's my fault, because I found it easier to, because at the end of the day, if you're the one creating the product, you can't turn around to anyone else, because if you haven't managed to get everybody behind that same message behind the player, at the end of the day, I found it was easier to explain and say it's my fault. Anyway, it's probably a slightly negative way of describing it, but I mean it in the best possible way, because that's why it's such an enjoyable thing to do. Anyway, Julianne, lovely chatting to you. Been really good. I think we need to do more conversations on this topic and beyond. We haven't even got into half of the areas of live ops I'm sure we would like to, let alone product design and battle passes. Oh, I've got so many conversations about battle passes.
my beer garden analogy.
Your big garden analogy, yes. We need to do
My
more on
beer
that.
garden is is one of those tools that I've used to communicate.
So we
to
have
my
to do
team.
another episode talking about beer garden analogies, etc. I hope you've enjoyed that. So obviously, if you have, please like, subscribe, share. Come onto the Discord. The Game Dev Local Discord is full of other game designers and developers and people who are interested in the making of games, and they want to find out what you think and talk about these issues. Julianne, if people want to find out more about what you're doing and how to find you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Right now, the best way to just find me up on LinkedIn is Julianne Harty. I said my startup's kind of in stealth mode at the moment, but hopefully we'll get some announcements on that soon.
And hopefully we'll find out more about it soon too. Okay, on that note, thank you very much, folks. This has been your Game Dev Local podcast, and we'll be back next time as we continue the podquest to learn everything we want to know about game dev, but never dare to ask.